This is an install video of the parabolic damper on a Yamaha Yz450F. This also includes the 250 and the WR. Let's take a look what comes in the box. Of course, you get your parabolic damper with a lever and a pin in it. Here's the clamp that mounts it to your handlebars. Next to that we have the frame mount, and then a pivot dog that has a screw with a nut on it. That's important later. There's spacers for your handlebars and a replacement washer for your airbox. And here's the boot. Alright, we're going to start by taking off the number plate, of course, and then the top triple clamp. Now we're going to take off the handlebar clamps. We're going to leave the handlebars mounted to them though. You can leave the controls on the handlebars. Throwing a rag down on your fender might help. If you're using the handlebar clamp holes in the triple clamp that are closest to the rider, you'll need to use a spacer to space up your handlebar clamps. If you're in the holes of the triple clamp furthest from the rider, no spacer is needed. On this bike, we're using position number 2, which is the near hole clamps offset away from the rider. Be a 3mm thick spacer needed. The correct spacer will be provided in the box. And that's why you need to tell us what position your handlebar clamps are going to be in when you purchase your parabolic damper. Now we've inserted the spacers. Now we're going to reinstall the handlebar clamps, torque them to factory spec. Now we're going to remove the steering stem nut. Very little clearance between the top of the steering stem and the bottom of your handlebar. So you're going to want to loosen the nut first, then loosen the triple clamps. You may need to budge the triple clamps up in order to get the nut off of the steering stem. Alright, we'll take these off and just set them on the fender like we did the bars before. Alright, now we're going to remove the air box lid. And remove the screw that holds the air box to the frame. On some frames, Yamaha leaves this nub. On others, they don't. You'll have to remove it by grinding it down, making it even with the frame diameter. This was just a port used to fill the casting. It serves no purpose. Now, grab the frame clamp and take the two 6mm screws out of the nose of it. Now we're going to install the frame mount. You'll need to pry it open to get it around the frame. A screwdriver will do the job here. Now notice the pivot dog is not installed yet. This makes the job much easier. Fish the frame mount underneath the airbox plastic piece. Now grab the button head screw and the spacer we provided. This has a lower profile so you can fit the pivot dog in there. Notice the frame clamp is underneath the plastic part of the airbox. Alright, now we're going to tighten the two front screws. So reinstall those and then work them back and forth. Tightening, snugging one up, then the other, making sure that the clamp is well nested in the frame You may need to tap it around a little bit, make sure it's in there. Just go ahead and work those back and forth, tightening them up. Let's tighten up that air lid screw too. Kind of finish tightening that down too, making sure all 3 screws are nice and secure. Now grab the pivot dog. Make sure that the nut is tightened down on the pivot dog, smashing the Teflon washers. This will make it easier to try and slide it in there. Now, we're just going to get it started, and then we're going to remove the screw. If you slide the pivot dog here near the back, where it's a little bit wider in that clevis, you'll find that it's a little bit easier to get in that way. If you're having trouble getting it in, you may need to tighten up those front 2 screws a little bit more. That'll help spread the clevis out a little bit. Once you get the pivot dog started into the clevis, now you can remove the nut and the screw. Now we can push the pivot dog in the rest of the way. You may want to tap it with the end of a screwdriver or soft hammer to get the holes lined up. Then we're going to reuse that screw we just took the nut off of and put it through the aluminum mount and through the pivot dog. Okay, now we're going to add a little blue Loctite to the pivot dog screw and go ahead and install that. And then we'll go ahead and torque that to 9 Newton meters when we're all done, and also torque those front 2 screws to 9 Newton meters also. Okay, now we can get that air box lid back on. And don't forget the washer. And then we can start getting the triple clamps back on. Okay, so we're going to work the triple clamps back and forth, sliding them on, but don't go all the way down. You're going to need to slide that nut in beforehand, before you reach bottom. Okay, so now let's go ahead and slip that nut in and get it started, and then we can push those triple clamps down the rest of the way while we're working the nut. Get it all down there nice. Now we can go ahead and torque that nut. It can be a little bit of a tight fit in here, so sometimes you got to work it. And now we can start tightening the triple clamps to the fork tubes. Go ahead and tighten these all up and then torque them to the factory specs. Okay, now grab the boot, put the small side down on top of the pivot dog so the smaller hole goes down. Slide it right over that. Now we can grab the damper. Okay, take the pin, slide it in a hole, and that's a super snug fit on there, so you'll actually compress air as you slide it on. Put the damper on the front side or back side of the handlebar, and then put the clamp on the front side of your handlebar, and go ahead and start screwing those screws in. Alright, let's just snug these up for now so we can still position the damper. We're going to want to get the damper centered between the handlebar clamps and adjust the gap from the bottom of the lever to the top of the pivot dog. They don't move up and down like shock and vibes or PHDS. So a small gap, 1 or 2 millimeters, between the bottom of the lever and the top of the pivot dog is fine. Yeah, see how that moves? So just slide it right down there. Just leave a 1 or 2 millimeter gap, and then you can snug up your clamps a little bit more. If you had moving clamps, you'd have to increase this gap to allow for like your shock absorber PSDS travel. Okay, now let's check the travel of the damper, make sure we're able to hit our steering stops and we're not bottoming out internally on the damper and using our damper for a steering stop instead of the bike's actual steering stops. So you can see the motion here, and yes, the pin is supposed to slide up as you turn. That's how the parabolic works, and it's at its closest gap when you're going straight ahead. So yeah, we're going to make sure we can hit our steering stops on one side and the other. Now let's say you can't hit your steering stop on one side. Let's say it's the left side. You can't hit your steering stop. You're going to want to slide the damper a millimeter to the left until you can hit both steering stops. Just 1 millimeter at a time, and then you'll know. And right here you'll see this dot, right the middle of the lever, and there's a dot on the damper. You can't see it super well in the video, but you want to make sure you're not, at or past that dot. That means you've still got a little bit of travel left in the damper, and you're hitting the steering stop, not bottoming out on the damper. If you're unable to hit either steering stop, you're going to need to rotate that damper down and lessen that gap between the lever and the top of the pivot dog. Once we have that positioned, we can go ahead and slide the boot, the top of the boot, onto the bottom of the lever. Once you're sure you have the damper mounted correctly, you can go ahead and torque the 4 clamp screws to 5 Newton meters. Now you're going to want to watch our how to set the high speed video. The high and low speed are set for the factory for a 5. So if you like riding the feel of a 5, your high speed should be already set. But watch the video so you can learn how it's done.